Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net. Today we're going to very quickly finish up our fourth Celebrate the Seasons panel, and we're going to finish our little shamrock panel. All right, I am super excited to share with you our fourth installment of Hoffman's Celebrate the Seasons panels. We have done the Welcome Home, we did January, and we did February. And I just want to point this out because if this is your first time joining us, I want to encourage you to go back and check out the other ones. The first one that we did was Home Sweet Home, and there's a free downloadable pattern with each one of these little design tricks. But what's really nice is when we very first started, we talked about border math and how to start with either a panel, any panel that you'd like, any quilt that needs to be brought up into size, and there's rules about borders and math and side math. So that was what we started with, and then in January we did Chili, and that was a cute little snowman, and with that one we did kind of a really cool mixed 4-patch border. So again, that pattern is with that video, and I think probably all of those will be linked below. They're on a little playlist. And then we also did, for February, we did a really cute hearts one, and we did some mixed cornerstones, which are kind of fun. So this month, as usual, your pattern is linked below, free little PDF that you can print off. But this month, we're doing it slightly different. So in all of the other panels, we have trimmed them all the exact same size, which I believe was 22.5 by, I think, 26.5 long. The reason we were keeping it relatively consistent is because if you wanted to mix and match your panels with your border treatments, you could do whatever you wanted to and it would work out okay. But then I thought, as we continue through this series, we're going to make the borders just a little bit harder each time so that you're learning something new each time and maybe mixing up the techniques just a little bit. So this one, this first one, or this is the first one where the size is slightly different. So this one is 22.5 as before. But this one is 36.5 inches long. So it's a full 10 inches longer. All of the others have been squares. This one is our first rectangle. And I just want to mention that because it's not that you couldn't do that with your other ones, but it'll be a little bit different. The other thing is I'm not going to go over some of the details that we've already done in the past. So in the past we've talked about how to square up your panel perfectly and what you end up doing in terms of cutting all of these apart. So that's what I've already done. You can see that I've trimmed off this tiny little bit of salvage on the side. This is what's left. This piece I am going to use for my backing. It'll be the exact right spot. And then I've trimmed off this top and this bottom so that this is the panel that I'm left with. We're going to talk about these two pieces in just a few moments. So what we're making, if you saw when we first started, what we're actually going to do is we are going to do some square in a square asymmetrical border treatment. And so I'm just going to show you how to make these blocks. I'm going to show you how to finish the borders and what I decided to do. But at the end, I'm going to remind you that you can mix and match, whip this up a little bit differently. You can have more squares if you'd like. You can have less squares. You can really do whatever you'd like to do. This is really a technique class to show you how to make the block, how to fit everything in, how to finish up your quilt, how to make sure that everything fits, because we want to make sure that this piece is still used as our backing for this piece. So let's move to the cutting counter and I'm going to show you how to get started and what to cut. Okay, so let's start by just referring back to the pattern and showing you what you're going to cut. You are going to need 12 squares, and if you look at this, you'll see I've got 6 squares at the top and I have 6 squares at the bottom, and these squares are surrounded by this same border piece. So if we look at the fabrics that I've chosen, I put at the bottom, I put the little gold coins are at the bottom, and then at the top I use something kind of special. So I went ahead and took an opportunity to cut off a 2.5 inch strip off of my backing fabric. The fabric that I said that you had to set aside and be really careful with. Well, we absolutely could spare easily 2.5 inches. I cut that off, and so that's where I got this fun little scattered clover that I used for my top squares. Your other option is we will not be using this for anything. And if you remember, this is what we cut off of the top and the bottom of the panel. Your other option, if you want to be super crazy, is I had one of these, just one of these little mini charm packs, and I had one that was rainbow, so I went ahead and picked out the 6 colors in the rainbow that are featured on the panel. And so another option would be just to do bits of the rainbow. You could really do anything that you'd like. It totally doesn't matter. It's whatever little special squares, whatever special colors you want to go ahead and feature in there. So again, for me, I have cut out 6 gold ones for the bottom, and then I went ahead and did 6 scattered shamrocks for the top. And that's what I went ahead and opted with. So once you've decided the colors for the squares that you're going to feature, these are 2.5 inches. The background is 2.25 inches. And I'm just going to review for 1 second how we cut our strip. So once you've cut your strip into a 2.25 inch, I just want to show you that what I tend to do when I'm cutting something is I tend to use my wet erase marker. The wet erase marker is kind of nice. That's why I always have a green finger, because once I've decided where my 2.25 is, I'm going to measure over very carefully, put a little mark, very carefully. Oh, see, there we go. That one has a little 1/2 inch there. Let's come over here. 1, 2.25, 1, 2.25. Usually also in the corner I put a little dot so that I know exactly where I'm cutting. The reason that this is easy for me is because without those lines, I might lay this down and I might look several times counting. I might accidentally get that little 1/2 inch piece in there. And sometimes you're cutting all kinds of squares incorrectly before you realize that you've done that. So just taking a minute just to mark my ruler, and I know that other people will sometimes use, there's some tapes and there's some different things that you can use, but I find this to be the least cumbersome, quickest, most efficient way to go ahead and do it. That way I can just line this up right on my cut edge and make sure that everyone is exactly the same. And then when I change to go do something else, I can either use a wet paper towel or just a moistened finger, and I can get those marks off of there to be able to use it again for something else. And again, it's just a wet erase marker, not a dry erase. You don't want to use a dry erase because then you could accidentally wipe that off when you still need it, or it could come off on your fabric. All right, so once we've cut those, again, we're going to need 2 of these 2.25 inch squares per square that we have. And you're going to take these squares and you're going to cut them in half on the diagonal. And the easiest way to do that, if you look at your ruler, most of your rulers will have that 45-degree line. So what you can do is you can go ahead and line that up. I don't know if you can see that. And then you know that I'm absolutely right on the center here and right in the center there to make sure that I'm cutting accurately. You can cut multiples. I tend not to when I'm doing something like this. I don't want the piece underneath me to slide, so I tend to only cut one at a time. So you're going to cut all of these in half on the diagonal, yielding all of these. Then I'm going to take my piece, and I have just this little measuring trick, or I guess it's more of a lining up trick, where you can go to the iron or finger press a line right in the center here. If you can see that line, I know right sides together that I'm going to line this point right up with that crease. So I'm right on the edge here, and that is right in that point. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch right here. Then on this opposite side, I'm just going to lift this up ever so slightly, tuck that one in there, and do the exact same thing. This point is lined up with that. This is right on this edge. You can see there's that little hangover which we need, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch right there. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to come right back. All right, so we've sewn our seams, so now we're going to press it open. I do like to use Best Press, And I'm just going to make sure that when I press this that my seam is fully open on both sides. That matters because of size. The size of your block is important, and if part of your block is hanging over in the seam, your block won't be the right size. All right, so once we've pressed this open, we're not going to worry about these dog ears just yet. What we're going to do is the exact same thing when we put on the other two, but I'm just going to flip this over. Put a little line there. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take this one, line this up so that that point is right in there in that crease and right on this edge. Take the other one, line that up, and make sure that it is right on that crease. And sew my 1/4 inch on both sides. I'm going to do that and I'm going to be right back. All right, we've sewn the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do the same thing. Just press this open. And when you're pressing, you just want to remember to use the edge of your iron to open up that seam. You don't want to pull or distort anything. Your whole idea is just to get those seams open and flat. Now that that's open, now you're going to see, now it's time to go ahead and cut off those dog ears. And really all we have to do is we just have to do it with our scissors. We're just going to come around and snip those off. And as we snip those off, if you have to do any squaring up of your block, you can do just a little bit if you need to. This block is going to end up being 3 1/4 by 3 1/4. Okay, if you have to do any kind of little extra trimming, you can see that there's very little trimming that you do in order to get this block to that 3 1/4 inches. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to make 6 for the bottom, and then whatever color you've decided, you're going to make 6 for the top. I'm going to go ahead and finish piecing these, and then we're going to meet back at the board. Just a little pro tip that I want to mention before we go too much farther. As you're sewing all of these on, what you might find is that when you start sewing here and as you get down here, you have all of these weird little tails. You're going to be sewing right in between there. And so if these seem to cause a little bit of trouble and they seem to be moving back and forth a little bit, that's where we use a stiletto. There's all kinds of different stilettos. This one is a really nice one that comes with a presser. And then this one is really nice because it has a stiletto at one end, a seam ripper at the other, and then even a little seam fix where you can rub out those funny little holes when you do any ripping. So what you'll see is if you're finding trouble with these kind of getting bound up a little bit, if you just grab a hold of it with your stiletto and just guide it in there, it'll help you a little bit when you're piecing these small pieces. All right, they're all done. And just in case anybody has any questions, Brianna is going to link the fabrics that I used below. This is a swirl basic, and this one is an Origins, also a basic. So I really like the vibrant color because with this digital image with Hoffman, it's just a lot of color, so it's really nice. So I like the way that it turned out. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I just did the gold coins across the bottom, and then the top was just a tiny little strip that I cut off of my backing. You can see that my backing is still plenty big because I'm going to leave it like this. I am not going to add another border. The main reason that I'm not going to add another border for this is because I want to use this as my backing. It was the way that they printed it. It's why we're spending a little bit more for a panel because they gave us this extra piece, and I feel like it's important to go ahead and use it. Okay, so let's talk about our borders. Really very, very simple. The only thing that's a little bit tricky is sewing these two pieces together. If you've taken any classes from me or from Brianna, you've seen us do this trick before, but these are the blocks that we pieced, and they came out 3 1/4 inches. That's pretty much the size that they need to be. You really don't want to square these up or trim these up at all, because what was left over when we pieced those is we had this tiny little 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around our points, so that when we sew all of these together, our squares will just be sort of floating and we won't hit those points. So there's a couple ways that you can sew these together. What I like to do is I just like to use my little Wonder clip, and when you put these together, I clip these together so that I have got one point that comes right down, the end comes right to that point, and I can see that on the other side it's doing the same thing. Can you see where that's at? And so I know that I have got the point here matching up with the point on the back, and as I sew, I'm going to sew right on the end of that. The reason that I like the Wonder clips a little bit better than a pin is that with a pin, as you're going in and out and back in to hold that pin, you can have some distortion. And so what's nice about this is I know that I can look on both sides, I can see that those points line up, and I end up with a perfect point every time. And the other thing too is that you don't want to sew right on that point. You want to make it a scant 1/4 inch. The reason for that is because you do have some bulk in that seam even when you're pressing it, and so it'll look like you don't have a point, but it's just in your pressing. So scant 1/4 inch, clip it with a Wonder clip. That's the only real trick. If you need to see this again, we've done it in multiple videos. We've done it in, they'll be linked below. So we've got multiple opportunities to see this trick. All right, once you've sewn these together, then what I would do is I have also cut, put these back down here for you, I have also cut the other part of my border. This is also 3 1/4 inches. So once I've sewn these two together, I'm going to sew this one to it, and then I have all of my seam allowances out of the way. Then I can go ahead and measure this. I'm going to measure this over that same 22.5 inches, cut that off, and sew it to the bottom. Oops. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to sew these two together. So this strip, you can see I haven't cut this yet. So this strip on there, make sure everything is sewn, pressed, I have it exactly the way I want it. Then I'm going to measure this, my 22.5 inches, cut that off, sew that onto the top. Then do the same thing with the sides. It's important that you measure those sides, that this and this is the same, the border is the same length. This one and this one, the borders are the same length. The reason that that's important is because if they're not, then what will happen is your wall hanging will be distorted. That's why we end up with funny little wonky borders. We've talked about this, I think, every time, but always important just to reiterate that you measure your borders before you sew them on. So we would sew 1, 2, 3, 4 together, making sure those points are all okay. Sew this one on, and then measure this length, which is going to be a little bit bigger because we started with 36.5. We added this border, so whatever that measurement is, which is going to be somewhere around 42 inches, cut that off, sew that one on, and do the same one on this side. And that's it. Once that's done, your top is all pieced. We then have our backing that's already all prepared for us. All you'll have to do is quilt it however you'd like to. You can go ahead and add your binding. I haven't decided on my binding yet, but I do have a little bit of the gold left over, and I also have a little bit of my border fabric left over. So anyway. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for sewing with us, and I hope that this was inspirational and that you finish your shamrock panel. You can also use the same technique to border any fun little panel you have, any little quilt, anything that you want to make bigger, because obviously once you've put this border on, you can just keep going with other borders if you'd like to. So again, thanks for sewing with us, and we will see you next month when we do our Easter panel. Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.